Do you want to own an auto repair shop? Because on paper, it looks like the safest bet in business. Every car on the road is a future customer. Nobody skips a brake job out of boredom, and nobody negotiates with a timing chain that's about to snap. When the economy is strong, people buy more cars and drive them more miles. When the economy is weak, people hold on to their old cars longer, and old cars need more repairs, not fewer. It's one of the only businesses that seems to win in both directions. So, you find a building, you sign the lease, you start pricing lifts. And before you've replaced a single spark plug, before your name appears on a single invoice, you write a check for $1,218,818. That's not a typo, and it isn't even the ceiling. It's a real number pulled straight from a franchise disclosure filing for a repair shop that hasn't opened its doors yet. Depending on the size of the building and how many bays it runs, the total can land anywhere from $150,000 to well past $1 million, and none of it goes toward advertising or your first employee or your first customer. It goes toward permission to exist. That's not the surprising part. The surprising part is what happens to that money once it's spent, and why the number printed on the wall behind the service counter, the one that says $120 an hour, has almost nothing to do with what the person under your car actually takes home. Somewhere in the history of this business is a chain so large it was inside nearly every mall in America, and it collapsed for a reason that had nothing to do with broken cars. Somewhere in this business is a debt that doesn't belong to the owner at all. It belongs to the mechanic, and he's often still paying it off with a check he hands to a stranger who visits once a week in a truck. This is what it actually costs to own the place people go when their car won't start. The instinct that draws people toward this business isn't wrong. Cars in America are staying on the road longer than they used to, which means more of them are aging out of warranty and into the hands of independent shops. Repair work doesn't pause for a recession. It's one of the few storefronts where essential isn't marketing language. It's just true. But a repair shop isn't a single business. It's stacked layer over layer like an engine block. Land, steel, software, chemistry, insurance, human debt, and trust, all bolted together and running at once. Miss one layer and the whole thing seizes. We're going to take it apart the way a technician takes apart an engine that won't turn over, piece by piece, starting with the ground it sits on. Before the first lift goes in, the floor has to be able to hold it. A Midas franchise alone requires a total investment between $143,000 and $1,366,000 depending on the size of the shop, and an 8-bay location can run past $900,000 before a single customer pulls in. And a striking share of that number gets spent right here, on a building that doesn't exist in any form a customer would recognize. A standard slab won't do. A 2-post lift anchors into concrete rated for the stress of a 2-ton vehicle suspended 8 feet in the air, which means many older buildings need the floor cut open and re-poured before anything else happens. Add a 220-volt electrical run for hydraulic lifts, air compressor lines threaded through the ceiling, oil-water separators buried under the drain to keep waste fluid out of the municipal sewer system, and a building that looked like a bargain on the listing suddenly needs 6 figures of work before it can legally hold a car. Industry data on lift installation makes the gap concrete. A lift that costs $5,000 to purchase routinely costs $7,500 to $8,500 once installation and electrical upgrades are added, a 50 to 70% markup before the lift has raised a single vehicle. Picture the walkthrough. The owner stands in an empty concrete shell with a contractor pointing at 4 chalk marks on the floor where the lifts will go, and the contractor tells him none of those 4 spots can be poured until the plumbing underneath is rerouted. Nobody photographs that conversation for the grand opening. The building is the part everyone can see. It's also the most forgiving part of the whole business, because after this, nothing gets cheaper. A single commercial-grade lift runs $3,000 to $25,000 depending on capacity and configuration. A 4-post alignment lift, built to earn its keep on suspension and steering work, can run past $18,000 on its own. Multiply that by 6 or 8 bays, add a tire changer, a wheel balancer, a brake lathe, an EPA-certified refrigerant recovery machine, and a diagnostic scan tool capable of reading modern vehicle networks, and Midas's own disclosure documents put total equipment costs for a new shop between $52,500 and $270,000. That's before a single wrench has been purchased for a technician's own toolbox. And the machines don't stop needing money once they're bolted to the floor. Lifts need annual safety inspections. Alignment machines need recalibration. Scan tools need software updates that can cost thousands of dollars a year just to keep reading the newest model years. There's a particular kind of tension that plays out in shops with only one alignment bay. A technician finishes a brake job in 20 minutes, but the car behind it needs an alignment, and the alignment bay is occupied by a slow-moving front-end job that started an hour late because a part arrived wrong. The tech stands in the doorway of the bay, arms crossed, watching a machine that cost more than his truck sit tied up on a job that's bleeding the day's schedule. The lift lifts the car. It doesn't lift the business. That happens somewhere else entirely, and it's not somewhere you can see from the shop floor. Modern cars don't just need tools, they need permission. ALLDATA, the industry's largest source of manufacturer repair data, is used by more than 400,000 technicians across roughly 100,000 shop locations, and it's a subscription, not a one-time purchase, because the wiring diagrams and repair procedures change with every model year. Mitchell 1 runs the same model on the other side of the market, and neither is optional for a shop that wants to fix cars correctly instead of guessing. Then there's the layer most car owners never think about. Newer vehicles increasingly gate their own diagnostic systems behind manufacturer security servers, meaning a shop can own every physical tool in the building and still be locked out of certain modules without paying the manufacturer directly for access. Add advanced driver assist systems, the cameras and radar sensors behind lane keeping and automatic braking, and a simple windshield or bumper replacement now often requires a separate calibration procedure on a machine that costs tens of thousands of dollars by itself. Shops that don't own one have to sublet that step to someone who does, handing off part of the job and part of the margin on almost every collision-related repair that rolls through the door. There's a specific moment technicians describe. Mid-diagnosis, the scan tool returns a message that a module is locked and requires manufacturer authorization to proceed. The car is already on the lift, the customer is already waiting, and the shop, fully equipped, fully certified, still can't finish the job without paying someone else for the right to. Every year, cars get smarter, and workshops get more expensive just to keep up with them. The vehicle isn't only harder to fix, it's harder to be allowed to fix. Long before a shop earns a dollar, it has to earn the right to legally handle what's inside a car. Federal law requires anyone who services vehicle air conditioning to hold Section 609 certification before touching refrigerant, because the chemicals involved are regulated as ozone-depleting substances. Used oil, coolant, and brake fluid all count as hazardous waste in most states, which means a hazardous waste hauler under contract and a paper trail proving every gallon left the building the right way, not down a drain. Here's the part that actually matters to the bottom line. None of this is a background expense, it's a switch. A shop running the kind of revenue this business generates, call it $2,500 to $3,000 a day, doesn't get a small fine for a missing manifest, it gets the switch flipped to off. A suspended permit doesn't slow a shop down, it closes it for every hour it takes to fix the paperwork at zero revenue. There's a scene that plays out in almost every shop's history at some point. An environmental inspector walks in unannounced past the customer lounge and asks for the hazardous waste manifests from the last 12 months. The owner disappears into a back office, flipping through a filing cabinet, not worried about losing a customer, but about losing the day. Nobody dreams about a hazardous waste manifest, but it's one of the only costs on this list that can take a business from full revenue to zero revenue in a single afternoon. Here's where the real economics of the business live, not in the equipment, but in a single number most customers glance at and never question: the labor rate on the wall. Independent shops in 2026 typically charge somewhere between $90 and $150 an hour for labor, with dealerships running $20 to $40 higher on top of that. The median technician, meanwhile, earns close to $24 an hour for labor. That gap looks like pure profit sitting in the owner's pocket. It isn't, and understanding why is the difference between a shop that survives and one that quietly bleeds out over 18 months. Most shops don't pay technicians for the hours they physically stand in the building. They pay flat rate, also called book time. If the manufacturer's labor guide says a starter replacement takes 2 hours, the customer is billed 2 hours, and the technician is paid 2 hours of wages, regardless of whether the job takes 90 minutes or 3. A fast, experienced technician who finishes that 2-hour job in 80 minutes has effectively raised his own hourly pay. A slower apprentice working the same job earns less per hour worked for the same result the customer receives. Then there's the part of the labor rate customers never see. A technician earning $35 an hour working at roughly 80% productivity, because no one bills every single minute of an 8-hour day, actually costs the shop closer to $44 an hour once the unbilled time is absorbed. Add payroll taxes and benefits, and that same technician can cost the business nearly $50 an hour before the shop has covered rent, insurance, or a single tool. Shop owners are generally advised to keep total technician labor cost between 25 and 35% of revenue, which means most of that $120 an hour rate is already spoken for before it reaches the bottom line. Picture 2 technicians on a Friday afternoon. One flies through a brake job in an hour and 10 minutes, effectively earning $50 plus an hour on paper, already mentally spending the extra jobs he can squeeze in before close. The other, newer to the trade, is still on his first alignment of the day, watching the clock, aware that going over the flat rate time doesn't just cost him money, it marks him in the eyes of the service manager as someone who might not last. The hourly rate on the wall isn't a lie. It's just not describing what most people think it's describing. There's a cost in this business that never appears on the shop's balance sheet because technically it's not the shop's debt, but it becomes the shop's problem anyway. Unlike almost any other skilled trade, automotive technicians are typically expected to own their own tools, often tens of thousands of dollars worth of hand tools, diagnostic equipment, and rolling toolboxes. Companies like Snap-on, Mac Tools, and Matco sell directly to technicians through branded trucks that visit shops on a weekly route, offering financing that turns a $2,000 scan tool into a payment plan.
Among technicians who talk about it openly, it's common to hear about rolling balances in the thousands to tens of thousands of dollars, chipped away at with weekly payments from under $50 to several hundred, week after week, for years.
Here's why that's an owner's problem, not just a technician's. When a tool truck payment starts eating a bigger share of a paycheck than rent does, a competing shop offering 50 cents more per flat rate hour doesn't just look appealing, it looks necessary. That's turnover. And turnover has its own price tag. A bay sitting idle while a replacement gets recruited, weeks of reduced output while the new hire relearns the shop systems, and a training investment that just walked out the door and started earning someone else money. The auto repair industry has spent years describing a technician shortage that outpaces the number of new people entering the trade. Debt-driven turnover is a quiet compounding part of that math, and it shows up on the owner's ledger as lost billable hours long after the tool truck is driven away.
There's a scene that plays out on Tool Truck Day in shops across the country. The driver parks out back around the same time every week, and technicians drift out during a break, some buying, some browsing, and one or two hanging back near the toolbox instead. Not because they don't want anything, but because they already know what their balance looks like and would rather not have that conversation again this week. The owner, watching from the service counter, isn't thinking about any one technician's debt. He's thinking about which of them might be gone in 6 months and what an empty bay costs him between now and finding someone to fill it. The shop owns the building, the franchise owns the brand, the technician owns his own tools, and he's often still paying for them, but the bill the owner actually feels lands later as an empty bay in a schedule nobody can fill. A repair shop is one of the few businesses legally responsible for property it doesn't own, sitting inside a building full of open flame, compressed air, hydraulic lifts, and flammable fluids. That combination is why Garage Keeper's liability insurance exists, coverage specifically for customer vehicles while they're in your care, custody, and control. A car that catches fire while parked overnight near a space heater, a vehicle that rolls off a lift because a safety catch wasn't engaged, a test drive that ends in a fender bender 2 blocks from the shop. None of that is hypothetical. All of it is precisely what this category of insurance is written for. Layer on general liability, workers' compensation for a job that involves heavy lifting, crush hazards, and chemical exposure, commercial auto coverage for test drives and parts runs, and increasingly cyber liability, because modern shop management software stores customer payment information and, on newer vehicles, data pulled directly from the car itself. There's a specific kind of dread that shows up in an owner's voice on the phone with an insurance broker after a slow leak in an overnight space heater fills a bay with smoke, or after a technician backs a customer's truck into a support column reversing it out of a bay. The damage is done in seconds. The claim, the deductible, and the premium increase that follows last for years. Insurance is the one expense that never touches a wrench and never appears on a customer's invoice, and it's often the exact difference between a shop that survives a bad afternoon and one that doesn't survive the year. Every one of the costs so far can be measured in dollars. This one can't, and it may be the most expensive line item in the entire business. In 1992, California's Department of Consumer Affairs accused Sears Auto Centers, then one of the largest repair chains in the country, of recommending unnecessary repairs to customers tied to sales quotas placed on service riders. Sears denied intent to defraud anyone, but the story stuck to the brand for decades. The auto centers never fully recovered their standing, and as Sears' broader retail empire collapsed into bankruptcy, revenue had fallen more than 50% in the 5 years before the 2018 filing. The last Sears Auto Center locations quietly closed in January of 2020, ending a business that had once been inside nearly every Sears store in America. That story sits underneath a metric every shop owner watches closely today: comeback rate, the percentage of jobs a customer has to bring back because the repair didn't hold or the diagnosis was wrong. A high comeback rate doesn't just mean redone labor for free, eating directly into the thin margin a technician's flat rate hour was supposed to protect. It means a customer who tells 3 friends instead of 1. Picture a service rider on a slow Tuesday, looking at a car with worn but not yet failing brake pads, aware the shop is behind on this month's numbers, phone in hand, deciding whether to describe those pads as should be watched or needs replacement now. It's a 2-second decision. It's also, multiplied across 1,000 similar decisions a year, the entire difference between a shop customers trust for a decade and one that quietly loses them one slightly too convenient recommendation at a time. A repair shop doesn't really sell repairs. It sells the belief that it told you the truth about what your car needed. That belief, once broken, doesn't come back, not for any price on the invoice. For anyone who chooses the franchise route instead of going independent, there's one more layer sitting on top of everything already discussed, and it's taken as a percentage off the top before a single bill is paid. Meineke charges franchisees a 7% royalty on gross sales, plus an 8% marketing fee. 15 cents of every dollar that comes through the door gone before rent, parts, payroll, or insurance are touched. Midas structures it differently, with royalties ranging from 2 to 10% depending on the type of service, plus another 5 to 6% for national marketing. Those fees fund brand recognition and a name customers already trust when they're standing on the side of the road with a check engine light on. But they're also a fixed cost that exists whether the shop has its best month ever or its worst. The numbers land hardest when you compare revenue to what actually reaches the owner. Meineke's own franchise disclosure data reports average gross sales of roughly $970,000 a year per location, and average owner earnings of only $91,000 to $110,000. That's a business generating nearly $1 million in revenue and returning something closer to 10 cents of every dollar to the person who financed the building, signed for the lifts, and carries the debt if it fails. There's a moment that happens once a year in almost every shop's back office. The accountant slides a profit and loss statement across the desk, and the owner's eyes go straight to the top line, the big number, the one that sounded like success all year, before the accountant's finger moves down the page, past royalties, past payroll, past insurance and parts and software subscriptions, to the number at the very bottom. The silence in that moment says more than the spreadsheet does. $1 million in annual revenue sounds like wealth. In an auto repair shop, it's often just proof the business survived long enough to spend it. None of this shows up on the invoice a customer signs at pickup.
Not the reinforced concrete, not the alignment machine gathering dust while one bay backs up the whole schedule, not the ADAS calibration a shop has to sublet out, or the hazardous waste manifest sitting in a back office filing cabinet. Not the flat rate math that turns a $35 an hour technician into a $50 an hour cost, or the tool truck debt a mechanic carries on his own shoulders. Not an insurance policy nobody thinks about until smoke fills a bay. Not the 2-second decision at the service counter that decides whether a customer ever comes back. Not the 15 cents of every franchise dollar that's already gone before the doors even open. All of it is compressed into one number, printed behind a sign behind the counter that most people glance at for half a second before asking how much longer the car is going to take. The next time you drop off a car and see a labor rate posted on the wall, it's worth remembering what that number is actually carrying. It isn't a mechanic's greed, and it isn't a shop padding its margin for fun. It's a building, a fleet of machines, a stack of software subscriptions, a filing cabinet of permits, a technician's own tool debt, an insurance policy, and a reputation built one honest recommendation at a time, all of it holding up 1 hour of someone's labor. The most expensive part of an auto repair shop was never the machine that lifts the car. It's everything invisible that has to hold the business up instead. If you want the next hidden economics breakdown, drop a comment with the business you want taken apart next. A dealership, a tow company, a car wash chain, a tire shop, whatever you've always wondered the money behind. And if this pulled back a curtain you didn't expect, subscribe. This channel exists to keep opening the hood on businesses everyone recognizes and almost no one actually understands.